Yogi Aaron, stop stretching. He's a yoga instructor who's created a completely new brand of yoga. It's called AYAMA, Applied Yoga Anatomy and Muscle Activation. He cites many scientific studies where stretching just is not helpful and oftentimes hurtful. It's fascinating discussion. I was always taught, I'm in my mid 50s now. When I played sports as a youth, always to stretch. You're going to get hurt if you don't. The studies are coming out now that perhaps disputing that. He does a great job of talking about it. Like I said, he practices yoga now. He has a certain brand that he teaches others to do as well, where they don't do any stretching at all. Talks about cooling down period after CrossFit, where it's just not necessary. I was always taught your muscles are tight. When they're tight, you got to stretch them, you got to loosen them so you don't get hurt. The studies he cites out of the University of Las Vegas, I believe, where these athletes stretch and then they were found to have less power in their legs, and just a fascinating discussion. His book Stop Stretching is very interesting, but a great conversation. He opened a retreat in Costa Rica. That's where he is during this interview, but just a great conversation with Yogi Aaron about stop stretching. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Oh my goodness, Yogi Aaron, thank you so much for your time today. It looks beautiful there in Costa Rica. Stretching. Why do everything that I know about stretching, you're turning upside down?
Is that the question?
Yes.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, sure is.
That's really funny. Right out of the gate. So it's such a loaded question, but the simple answer is, and then I can expound upon it, but the simple answer is that when we stretch a muscle, we disconnect that muscle from the brain. The brain knows where the muscle is in space. And so when the body, like when it needs that muscle, it tells the muscle contract, contract, contract. When we passively stretch a muscle, we actually disconnect the muscle from the brain. So the scientific word is like proprioception. Like there's the proprioceptors are like connected, like it knows where that brain is in space. And when we stretch it, it disconnects it. Another way to think about it too is like in the muscle, you have these muscle spindles. And muscle spindles are like, slinkies. Like you take a fresh slinky, like out of the box, it's all coiled up, right? And that's the job of a slinky. It's to coil up. But then kids, being kids, get together and they see how far they can stretch that slinky, right? But then when they let go of the slinky, it does not coil back up. And that's kind of like the muscle spindles. The muscle spindles are like that. Their job is to stay in a coiled state. And sometimes they do relax, but their job mainly is to get, to tighten up. And so that's why stretching is not good in a short answer.
I mean, I played soccer as a youth, and we were always told if you're not stretched, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get hurt because you're stiff and your muscles Actually, I don't really quite understand why. Come to think about it, but they were just it was just so ingrained.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things that, that we just say and people just say, and we don't really often stop and think about the reasons for it. And I'm just going to kind of go out on a limb too and just say, like, a lot of doctors will also say that. Like, they'll just say, like, oh, I heard yoga is good for you, I think you should do it. Well, if I'm a patient seeing a doctor, I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to go, oh my god, my doctor just said yoga is good for me. That's, and the doctor actually didn't say that. He said he heard it was good,
Mm.
and maybe you should stretch. But there's really no, there's absolutely no scientific evidence to support that stretching prevents injuries.
Mm.
Some of the evidence has said it doesn't do anything, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest just what I said, like athletes lose their force output of the muscles when they stretch. So it's not, yeah, don't stop stretching.
In your on your great podcast, you cite some studies from, I believe, the University of Las Vegas, where
Yes,
the pushing force for the legs of these athletes were better when they didn't stretch, and
yes.
there's a lot of scientific data backing this up.
Yes. Yeah. And my teacher Greg Roscoff, I mean, he had this big awareness that his job was to increase internal rotation, to improve pronation, and and he would do that through kind of passively starting to get these athletes to improve internal rotation. And his teacher came up to him at that time, Craig, I think it's Craig Bueller, and he came up to check the muscle function of these muscles, and they just stopped working. And so Craig turned to Greg and said, like, what did you do? You improve range of motion, but there's no strength in that range of motion. And so as we're working on if we want to improve range of motion, what we really should be focusing on is improving muscle function. Like, in order for me to raise my arm up, it's not contingent on how flexible the muscles are in the front of the arm to raise my arm up. What's raising the arm up is the back muscles of the arm that's responsible for the arm extending. They need to shorten properly. If they're not shortening properly, that arm is going to go nowhere.
Hmm.
And so, like, I had a woman on my table the other day, and literally she got her arm, it was about 30 degrees off the table. I went to work on all of the muscles that are responsible to move that arm in that range of motion, and I improved their muscles' ability to contract. So then, yeah, she improved her range of motion. She was actually able to get her arm right on the table. But not only was she able to do that, she now has stability within that range of motion.
Wow.
And that means, like, if there's a force applied on it, she's not going to, the joint is going to stay stable. It's not going to become unstabilized.
Incredible.
Yeah.
You've had a I was going to say complicated, but a very serious history with chronic pain. Your first book, Autobiography of a Naked Yogi, you talk about pain that you had in your 20s, and then in your 30s you thought it was all over, and then you kind of came to this epiphany. Let's talk about pain and you, Yogi Aaron.
So, I think that a lot of people get into yoga because they want to become more flexible, and a lot of people equate flexibility with staying young and
Mm.
being healthy. And I had the exact same idea in my head when I first started doing yoga when I was 18, and then all the way in my 20s and 30s. And even 40s, I really continued doing these kind of stretching practices because I wanted to stay young and I wanted to stay healthy. And but right out of the gate, when I first started doing yoga, I hurt myself.
Mm.
And I remember the first time I hurt myself, my back seized up. And I thought, I am way too young to be living with, a back that's seizing up. And so my solution was to do more yoga, to stretch more. And I would see yoga teachers, my teachers, and I would say to them, like, my back is really hurting. I deal with back pain a lot. What should I do? Oh, you need to open your lower back. You need to open your hamstrings. And so, me being a devoted student, I just went and did that.
Mm,
And I ended up, getting hurt again and again and again. In fact, I remember some yoga classes I would take, and I would start off in most yoga classes, teachers teach like the sun salutation practice, right? So I'm inhaling, bringing the arms up, I'm exhaling, folding forward, and all of a sudden I can feel my back seize up like that. And that happened several times, not just once. It happened many times. And the funny thing is, like, we're slow sometimes to learn. It took me 25 years to figure out that stretching was the thing that was hurting me, because I ended up in a surgeon's office, and an orthopedic surgeon's office, and he was like, "We're going to need to do a spinal fusion on you probably." And I can't tell you, Joey, like, what that does to a
mm,
person who believes that they know a lot about anatomy, knows a lot about alignment, and has been living his whole life to help, people open their bodies and stretch. And it was such a defeat, but I took that defeat and it was like, okay, what am I doing wrong? I Universe, speak to me. And
mm.
then that's what led me down this whole muscle activation uh, path.
Yeah, applied yoga anatomy muscle activation, AYAMA. And
Yes.
so you've created, I don't know what you want to call it, a genre, a section, a type, a category of yoga?
Yeah. I mean, I first of all, I've created it with a lot of humility,
Mm,
and unfortunately, like, I have to put a name to it because people are going to say, what kind of yoga are we practicing? What style? What are we doing? So I put a name to it just to help people, like, you know, have something that they can cling to.
sure.
But I mean, I really stick to the tradition of the yoga teachings quite intensely. As far as like yoga postures go, the idea of yoga posture is a few things, but at a core level, one of the ideas of yoga postures is to help us get stable in our bodies. And stability is like such a big word, Joey. Like, it can mean so many things, but in this sense, it means a couple of things. One, that we don't have pain in our body, that we're strong enough or stable enough, if you will, to do what we want to do. Like, I love hiking. When I'm hiking in the mountains, I feel like so connected to my life purpose. And so I feel alive and vibrant. But when my knees are screaming at me and I have to like lay on my bed for 3 days afterwards, or 4 days or whatever, because my knees are so swollen, that's not me able to live in my purpose. So yoga asana, the postures are geared towards helping us get still, helping us become stable, and starting to shift some of the momentum, if you will, in us energetically. Um, and so, what AYAMA endeavors to do is to take that basic core principle and go, yeah, how do we get more stable? And we look at like a lot of the way that yoga is taught today. There's so much emphasis, either unconsciously or consciously, unintended or intended, on stretching our body so that we can, quote unquote, get into these yoga postures. And that's not what the yoga gurus were thinking about when they passed on this lineage of yoga.
Yeah, you cite one example where wheel, somebody was doing wheel and they did like 16 positions to get to that, but you only need like one or two.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, like the whole paradigm. So that part of a yama is about flipping the script, and so it's not really. In some ways, I'm not really teaching anything new. I'm just asking people to look at it differently. And so, like with wheel pose, um, a lot of yoga teachers will prepare for wheel pose by stretching the quads, stretching the pecs, overstretching the shoulders, but all of this creates instability. And they'll
Mm,
take like 16 postures to do that. What we really need to do is just do like two or three postures and get the body muscles working. So instead of working on opening, quote unquote, the front body, what we really need to do is get the muscles in the back body, and get them to be able to shorten and contract properly. When they're able to shorten and contract properly, not only do we go into the posture with more ease if that's important to you, but more importantly, they stabilize the joints. A lot of people are afraid of doing back bends. Oh my God, because the number one complaint is like, oh, my back hurts when I do a back bend. Well, your back is hurting because your back muscles are not engaging properly. As
Mm.
soon as we get those back muscles engaging, they're able to support the joints, the body better, and we actually want to keep working those muscles because those are some of the most underused muscles in our body. The muscles in our back.
Hmm. Now, I've talked to people who have, who are yogis that have gone, to India and, got trained there, and then when they come back to the States, they're upset at some of the methods being taught there. Has the community give you any pushback at all?
Yes. I mean, as humans, we cling to a sense of self. We need
Hmm.
something to identify who we are. And as yoga teachers, we have a strong sense of like, I'm teaching yoga and I have to teach it by teaching people how to stretch.
Hmm.
And stretch, there is no other way. And it really kind of threatens people's yoga teachers' sense of like identity. And so, what I've been finding is about half of the people in the yoga world are really adamantly angry about this topic. Like, I will do posts in certain yoga teacher training groups or different yoga groups. And one time, I posted this thing about why you should stop stretching, and this one person like responded and said, "What is this malarkey?" And right away, and I tried to do some inquiry because I live by the axiom seek first to understand, and they just wouldn't respond. And I just thought, wow, like that's how bad people just shut down. And I have compassion for it. Like, I'm not trying to be an asshole and be like,
Hmm.
dogmatic, like you have to change. If you don't want to change, that's fine. Like, I'm not trying to talk to you. I'm trying to talk to the people who have experienced pain and don't know how to solve it in their body. Like, that's really who I want to talk to the most.
And there's great examples on the podcast of people that you've helped, and
Hmm.
the people that you're there in Costa Rica at your I was going to say resort, but it's a retreat there, Blue Asa, I believe it's called.
Blue
Uh,
Osa. Blue
Osa,
Osa.
Osa,
OSA. Yeah.
OSA. Yeah. Is there
So,
ever a good time to stretch?
I sometimes I say, well, if you are going to stretch, the answer is no. There's never a good time to
Wow.
stretch. Listen, the only reason why a muscle is tight is because the body senses instability. And so, like, I'll give you an example. One of my favorite activities is walking these days. I'm 51. I'm kind of like, walking or hiking. And so I try and like do 8 kilometers a day,
Oh.
4 to 6 times a week. And I love doing it. It clears my head. But one day I was out and I was walking and my inner groin started hurting. And so the natural tendency then, it was hurting because it was tightening up. And so the natural tendency is to like stretch it.
Yeah.
People go, "Oh, I got to stretch that inner groin out." Probably would feel good for a second or two, and then 5 minutes later, the pain would come back. And so what I did was, because I know what I know, I went into myself and go, "Okay, self, why is this inner groin tightening up?" Well, maybe the opposite muscle isn't shortening properly. So the opposite muscle is the glutes, specifically glute med, but which is responsible for abduction. So I went in, I was standing on the street holding onto a light post, and I did this very quick muscle activation for my glute med. But the fascinating thing for me was not only did the pain disappear, but it never came back.
Hmm.
And so the body, like somehow my body was sensing instability in my hips. No, I don't know why, but it sensed instability. And it said to whatever muscle it could, tighten up, tighten up, tighten up. So tight muscles are a sign of muscle weakness. There's a muscle somewhere that's not engaging properly. And so the body is trying to compensate for the stability by telling other muscles to tighten up. One of the biggest muscles that people experience tightness is in their hamstrings.
Yeah.
And so hamstring tightness is a sign that the quads, the hip flexors, are not working properly. If we get those muscles working, then all of a sudden the hamstrings are able to relax.
And we see that a lot in football, in American football, where they'll pull their hamstring, and the first person they'll point to is the trainer. You didn't stretch him out properly.
Yeah.
You don't believe
Yeah.
that's the case?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the torn hamstring. One time a few years ago, I was really into kind of jogging, running, making that part of my routine. And this is actually going back to one of the last times I did, because after that I stopped running so much. But I started dealing with calf tightness in my calves,
Hmm.
and so obviously I was trying to stretch them out at that time because I didn't know better. And so one time I was actually running, and I do this. It was a 5 kilometer circuit on the beach, and so I got halfway there, and just before I got halfway there, my calf muscle completely cramped up.
Hmm.
And it cramped up to a point that my PT person said, had I pushed it more, I probably would have torn the calf muscle. And he had seen that like happen to several people before. And so what was really going on in that instance was that my glutes weren't working properly. Probably my hip flexors weren't working. And so what was controlling the motion was my calf muscle. Our body, when we want to go from point A to point B, we're always going to get there. Our body will always find a way, and it will recruit whatever it can to get there. So with these athletes that tear their hamstrings, it's like, yeah, they tore their hamstrings because their hamstrings were becoming overused. They were stressed out because other muscles weren't doing their jobs properly. If you get the whole body working, the hamstrings would have been fine. So when we see muscle tightness or muscles cramping, the correct question to ask is what muscles are not working? Because
Hmm.
once we get those other muscles working, the tightness will disappear like instantaneously.
I know whenever I get a cramp in my calf, I point my toe up, and
Okay.
it removes it right away. But that's not really stretching. I guess it's just activating those other muscles, isn't it?
So what I'm hearing you say is like you kind of come onto the heel of that foot, and then you pull the toes towards your shin bone, correct?
Correct. Correct.
And so what you're doing, but you're not pulling on your toes to do that. I don't
No.
think you're pulling. And I
No.
also don't think you're standing on one of those kind of calf stretching machines. You're doing it actively. And
Right.
so whenever you're doing a movement actively, what you're actually doing is engaging your fibialis and your tibialis muscle, which is in the front of the shin bone. So you're actually activating those muscles. So a big one of the contributors to tight calves, since we're talking about calves now, is the muscles on the shin bones. And so the calf tightness was a symptom, probably in your case, of those muscles in the front of the shin that were not engaging properly. And
Interesting.
so to maintain stability of the knee joint and of the ankle joint, your calf muscles started tightening up in response. Whenever the body senses instability, we tighten up. It's like when we walk on ice, we tighten up. If we get scared, we tighten up. It's a
Right.
biomechanical response to maintaining some sense of stability within us.
And that tightening, I was always taught, can lead to injury. Therefore, you have to loosen it. It's not the
Yeah.
case.
No, actually, it's kind of the reverse because flexibility, if we
Hmm.
have flexibility, it always leads to instability, which always leads to injury. There's no accountability in flexibility. What you did was perfect in that case because you're activating the front muscles of the shin bone. And then all of a sudden, as those muscles activate, the opposite muscle, in this case, the calf muscles, start to let go. So, the reason why a muscle is able to lengthen is because the opposite muscle is shortening.
I coached my daughters in soccer. Now they're in their 20s now. This is preteen, but I remember one of the fitness people told us the NBA basketball players generally don't get hamstring pulls. Generally speaking, there are some, but they don't. And the reason is they believe is because they run backwards a lot.
Mm,
So
okay.
so from that point forward, I always incorporated the drills with the girls to run backwards.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, I think that falls right in line with your promoting.
Um, it could be. I mean, when you're running backwards,
You're not stretching, you're just
you're not
activating.
stretching. You're definitely going to be using the hamstrings more.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it could definitely be. I'd have to sit with that and think about it a little bit more and experiment with it. It would be interesting to do like a set of drills where you are running backwards and then check the hamstrings force output after and see, is it strong or is it weak? And that's the kind of cool thing about what I studied in muscle activation technique with Greg Roscoff, is that I kind of learned more about how to test muscles and if their force output was strong or weak. And when I'm leading my teacher trainings, just as a side note, this is kind of going a little off topic, but
Okay.
I'm constantly like showing them, like, okay, this is a strong muscle. Everybody agrees. Yes, you agree. Yes, yes. I can't push this leg down. I can't move this limb because the muscle is strong. Then we get them to stretch, and then we come back and retest the muscle. It is always weak. Always, always. The muscle loses its ability to contract and contract on demand properly.
In one of the podcasts, you talked about doing CrossFit, and at the end, I was doing it for a while too. There's always that cool down, and you would
Yes.
just walk away, and you would get snickers and looks from the instructors or the instructor, and you just didn't want to participate. You just didn't. It's not good for you.
No. I mean, honestly, I think the best thing, if you're going to exercise, if you're exercising, I think like the best thing to do is either go for a little walk. So that was when I was doing those classes that I mentioned in my podcast. Like I would just walk home. It was like, half a mile or something. And so that was my cool down. Or the
Mm.
other option is rest. Don't do anything, and rest cannot be understated.
Hmm.
I was talking to one of my students literally today about this, and she said that she was telling some of her friends, like, do muscle activation because she's from Minnesota. So they're do some muscle activation before you shovel the snow and then do it after. And I was just commenting and saying the best time to do muscle activations before your exercise, but after you've done your exercise, the next best thing is just to rest, not do anything, and just let your body come back to a homeostasis.
It's just blowing me away. Uh, er, I, I work out now, and I've been doing yoga for a while. I had a good friend that I was doing it for a long time. I do it intermittently now, but just after I work out, I just get down in that darn child's pose, and I just do it. It's something natural to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I it's I'm breathing heavy into the floor as I'm in that pose, and I get up to down dog and I go into cobra, and I it's just natural for me. It's not really doing anything for me is what you're saying.
Doing child's pose is definitely there's a whole bunch of yoga postures, but child's pose is like the worst pose to do.
Wow.
And it shuts down. So you think about like all these muscles that are either overstretching and then over passively contracting. So you have all the hip flexors, the trunk flexors are passively contracting, and then you have all of these back muscles and hip extensors, the glutes, that are passively stretching. And you come out of it and you have four major groups of muscles that are all not working. And all of these muscles are there to support the joints of your body. After you do CrossFit, theoretically, all your muscles are engaged, they're
Hmm.
working. So
Hmm.
why would you want those muscles to shut off?
Wow.
But if
Wow.
you did want a resting pose, in yoga, I teach this a lot, is like there's a couple of poses, but one of them, which is very popular in yoga, is shavasana. Just lie on your back for a few minutes. Do some deep diaphragmatic breathing. Doing deep diaphragmatic breathing can never be understated
Hmm.
of the value that you receive. Like, you just kind of move your body into that parasympathetic state, that rest and digest state. What more powerful thing that you can do than getting your body into a rest and digest state? The second one, which I use a lot in my yoga classes, is a pose called crocodile pose, or makrasana in Sanskrit. But it's simply you lying on your stomach in a prone position. And during the pandemic and the early days of COVID, when we didn't have enough ventilators, when there wasn't enough knowledge, and people were dealing with this respiratory issues, one of the words that we started to hear, which I don't think anybody had ever heard before, was the word proning. And they found that by putting people face down save lives.
Wow.
And so in yoga, this is actually a very popular pose to start practicing diaphragmatic breathing. For some reason, in this pose, biomechanically, you are able to breathe more deeply. You're able to access your diaphragm and move the diaphragm, and thus, oxygenate your body a lot more effectively. And so that's a great pose to do as well after exercise. Just
Hmm.
kind of hang out there for a little while.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. And for those of us who have, sedentary jobs, we're in front of a computer, sitting all day. I mean, is stretching or just yoga, or traditional yoga, is it still recommended by yourself?
I mean, so
Hmm.
for people that are sitting all day, you have to move.
Yes.
There's so many muscles that are shutting down when we're sitting. I remember about 8 years ago, there was articles even in the New York Times about how sitting is killing us, and right around that time, you started seeing like these stand-up desks or higher desks that people could kind of move, interchange between sitting on a stool, in a way that elevated their spine and then could transition to standing, sitting. So that's a very, important thing to consider. Sitting does shut down a lot of muscles, and you do need to move your body. The problem is, like, a lot of these yoga classes are very dynamic, and you have somebody that's sitting, their muscles are shut down, and immediately they're going into a yoga class with a lot of very aggressive yoga postures, like plank pose and half plank, and holding it
Mm,
for a few minutes, and doing like wheel pose without properly preparing for it. So the question is like, is what I'm doing helping me, or is it making me worse?
mm,
I would definitely look for a yoga class that really is embracing these AYAMA principles, that's embracing these principles of like, okay, you've been sitting, so now let's do some things to counteract some of the negative effects of it. Let's make sure that the stabilizer muscles of the trunk and spine are working, that your psoas is activated, that your glutes are activated. And it's interesting because, like, you and I have been sitting now for 30 minutes. And I'm sure if we got up, both of us would probably bring our hands to
yeah,
our back.
yeah.
But if we dropped down onto the floor and did one of my favorite poses, which is like locust pose, Superman pose, and we lifted our chest and our legs off the ground, and did that 6 seconds, 6 times, when we stood back up, we would feel like very stable
Mm,
very quickly. It can happen like that. In doing some of these muscle activation exercises, you can change your whole feeling of your body very rapidly.
hmm. And have you been training others on AYAMA and they're practicing it?
Yeah, that's how this whole thing really started. In my journey, I started studying with Greg Roscoff, who is the creator of muscle activation technique. And and one of the questions that I had going into the course was, how do I translate this to yoga? And very quickly, I realized like nobody in that MAT world was teaching this stuff. And I'm sorry, teaching it or translating it to yoga. Like there was nobody that was bringing it into yoga, which really kind of shocked me quite a bit.
Hmm.
And so I quickly realized like I have to innovate this so that I can teach it to my yoga teacher trainers because I didn't want to teach stretching anymore. So what am I going to teach? How am I going to translate these yoga postures? And as I went through that journey, I came up with the whole AYAMA system. And my intention wasn't really to go global, it was just to do it for my students and have like a really solid anatomy curriculum for them, something that they could really take and use. And as I started teaching it more, and I saw like what was happening. So, most of my teacher trainings I teach, most of my yoga trainings, yoga immersions, I get X amount of people coming in. 90% to 100% of them are dealing with some sort of pain issue in their body. And what I started to see was that within 6 to 10 days, everybody became pain free.
Hmm.
And it didn't matter like if they were dealing with shoulder issues, even in a lot of cases, wrist issues, hip issues, back issues, knee issues. Everybody's pain just started going away. They just
Oh.
were like not in pain anymore. And that was kind of like a wake up call for me to go, this stuff really works. Like I was a believer, of course, but to see it in action, and seeing it in action just kind of like made me go, okay, what do I want to do with this? And that was a big question so this is, we just entered 2023. So the 2021 New Year's Eve, I was like, how far do I really want to go with this? Do I really want to go big? And I just felt like purpose was knocking at the door of my heart, and that I really just needed to start spreading this in a bigger way. And my goal at the end of the day is just to try and start a conversation with people. Like you said, like, you're always taught to stretch. And I find, and I say this with humbleness. I'm not saying this like to be an asshole.
Hmm.
I'm saying this with a lot, as much humbleness as I can. That a lot of people out there are like the blind leading the blind. It's like one person says something, and then 10 more people agree with it and say it, and then it just keeps spreading from there. And so what I'm trying to do at the very least is just start a conversation and have us kind of like think about some of these ideas, these paradigms, in question, does that make really sense? Is it scientific? And is it really helping us? Is
Hmm.
it actually making us stronger, or is it making us weaker?
I mean, it's certainly a big shift, but if the science is there and you're practicing it, I don't necessarily feel better after I stretch. I just know that I should be doing it. But you're right, though, that I don't. It's not like, oh, I didn't stretch that time, I feel worse.
Yeah.
It's just a big shift, and I'm really glad you were able to talk. So on the podcast, we talk a lot about discipline, Aaron. I lost 130 pounds, I gained a lot of weight, starting a business. The doctor said you're not going to see your daughter graduate, pre-diabetic, pre-hypertension, and very bad situation I put myself in. So I knew I had to take myself out. And people always ask me, how did I lose the weight? Like there's some secret, like there's some easy way. And I just say discipline. I just got focused. I got discipline. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life.
Huge. I mean, I'm first of all kind of like an A-type personality. So when I put my mind to something, I can, focus it. Having said that, I will add that one of the things I've suffered a lot from is ADD, like attention deficit. I could
Mm,
never focus in school. My parents had me tested numerous times, and this was before they knew what ADD was. Thank God, because I'm glad I was never put on Ritalin, for God's sakes. But
mm,
it's I yoga has helped me to concentrate my mind a lot and create that kind of discipline, if you will, help me to harness my discipline and be able to focus my mind on what I want to accomplish. So absolutely. And in terms of like, coming back to the applied yoga anatomy and muscle activation, I always tell people like the stuff works, you'll feel it working, but you can't just do it once and think like it's going to, radically change you. You've got to stick with it. 8 minutes a day at minimum.
Hmm.
Just take 8 minutes a day, and that will really affect your life. But I'm just going to add one more thing and just say like a lot of people take yoga to learn how to bliss out, to get out of their head.
Mm, mm,
And yoga is actually asking us to do the complete opposite. It's actually asking us to come inward
hmm,
and start to focus their mind. And I would say that the greatest lesson that yoga teaches us, like in terms of practices, is how to concentrate. And it's through concentration and our ability to stay focused on one thing that really unleashes the power of what the potential of what the mind can do in our life. So becoming disciplined isn't just about like sticking to a set of rules, strict rules in a regimented way. No, it's really how long can you maintain an idea and stick with it? How long can you maintain
hmm.
like losing weight? How long can you stick with like exercise and stick with it? And mean not only stick with the practice, but also have in the same time the memory of why you're doing it, and be connected to that feeling or that idea of why am I doing this in the first place? Because a lot of people lose that why very quickly.
Yeah, they certainly do. I like what you said. So you're generally equating, if I got it correctly, discipline with kind of consistency.
Yes. Consistency, but also I think for me, like when I'm leading my yoga immersions, when I talk about this a lot, that there's, the proverbial S is going to hit the fan.
Mm.
And, our stuff is going to come up. I don't have time. I don't want to do this anymore. It's too difficult. I'd rather be on my iPhone checking my Facebook messages or whatever. Like we're so good at coming up with reasons why not. And I think part of discipline and consistency and staying in that consistency is also being connected to why am I doing this in the first place? And, the yoga scriptures actually talk a lot about this, but staying connected to that why and being focused on that why is just as important as going through the actions of whatever you're doing in your discipline.
So persistence, consistency. I also like you mentioned, getting onto the grid. You turn off internet access at dinner time and things like that, so people can
Yes.
talk more, and that's just wonderful. That's just wonderful because I see so even in restaurants, you see four people there and they're all on their phone at
Yeah.
one table. It's an absolute shame. Uh, but I digress. Certainly, things can be worse. Uh, so I really like the way you kind of couple that with, and when you teach your own brand of yoga, uh, is discipline a requirement for the attendees, for the students?
Is discipline a requirement?
Yeah. Do you
Well,
feel that
absolutely.
sometimes it's not the case, or they're in need of more?
Um, well, I think that, I mean, definitely we have a program, and
Mm.
the program starts generally at 4:30 in the morning. They need to be waking up. They need to be, sitting down, ready to go in the yoga studio by, 4:50 in the morning. And so there's kind of like a discipline structure in place, which is why a lot of people come and study with me and do these yoga immersions, because it's kind of like built in and they know they should be doing it. Not that they should be doing it, but they want to be doing it rather. And they want to, people really are craving a connection to purpose.
Mm.
I find that people are craving a sense of being at home in their bodies, um, and they're craving a connection to themselves and community. And so what we've crafted here is just like a structured environment so people can start to access that. But at the core of what I teach and what I provide is stillness at the end of the day. Like, there is no talking um, in the trainings until 8 o'clock. And usually at 8 o'clock, they're not talking. I'm the one that's talking. But we also turn off the internet in the morning so people really have this space to be able to connect with themselves and feel at home within themselves. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I talked to somebody who's a yogi who said they went on a 10-day, silent retreat where they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't speak for 10 days.
Vipassana, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is something. That is absolutely something. It's interesting how you say yoga's you're going inside versus out. I know so many. I just been dabbling in jujitsu a little bit, and there's just so many of the athletes that use yoga for the breathing, for that innerness. Uh, I don't know if they actually say the word stretching. How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about using the word stretching?
No, about like these athletes turning to yoga to better make them better athletes or better at that, that discipline or that athleticism.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, and this is me speaking without a lot of knowledge of martial arts, but what I've been able to glean is that for the most part, a lot of the martial arts, when it's taught well and correctly, it appears to me that there's actually is a lot of muscle activation involved. Like there's a lot
Mm,
of dynamic movement. When I say dynamic, I mean like you're kicking your leg up, but you're not grabbing your leg and bringing it up.
mm.
So in order for you to kick your leg up, you have to be engaging your hip flexors, and so there is a lot of engagement. I think that a lot of people turn to yoga because they're not happy with their range of motion. They're not happy with 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 their limited range of motion. And these are usually typically new people, like people that have been practicing a lot of these martial arts all their lives have a lot of range of motion because they use their bodies in those different ways, and they're dynamically moving through those ranges of motion. But somebody like me who's 50 years old, if I went into jiu-jitsu, I'm not going to have that equal range of motion that somebody has that's been doing it all their life, or for many years. And so the trend is like, okay, I need to make myself more flexible. The problem with that is that you start opening these ranges of motion in becoming more flexible, but you don't have the backbone of stability within it. So yeah, maybe you become more flexible, quote unquote, but you don't actually have the muscular stability to protect those joints. And so eventually, injuries are going to happen eventually. That's the problem with it. That's the dilemma.
And as far as yoga being making someone better at just breathing, I find that I just
Yeah.
breathe better and in through the nose, out through the mouth, just more when I do yoga. Beneficial?
Um, Absolutely. I mean, anytime that we're going to start working on improving our breathing, and definitely in through our nose and out through our nose, there's a lot of conversation that we're seeing about this and trying to move away from mouth breathing and moving more
Mm.
into using our nose because the muscles of the nose need to be used properly. And yeah, I definitely, when I'm teaching my AYAMA classes, I'm always integrating breath into all the movements, and that's the connection. That's part of one of the big connections in developing sort of more of that proprioception awareness, that mind body awareness, but also starting to integrate mind and breath together is really invaluable.
Mm. Hmm. Yogi Aaron, what motivates you?
um, so many things. Today, I was messaging a friend of mine and I said, I'm really realizing where I draw a great source of my inner strength from is being a trailblazer. And I haven't really been trailblazing, I feel like, for the last 10 years or something. some odd years. And, I kind of opened up Blue Osa and I stepped away from my old life and stepped into this life. And I don't really feel like I'm really being a trailblazer. So I've been noticing how energized I've been getting from talking about this stop stretching because nobody else is doing it. It's a radical idea. And
Yes.
it gets people to like stop in their tracks for at least a moment and go, what did he just say? And from there, we can have a conversation. And it's fun to kind of like, be a kind of person that's like forging different paths, or at least going on the path least explored. So I thrive in that environment.
And how do you measure success?
I measure success. There's a few different ways, but one of them is just being able to take the leap and just getting into it, getting messy and into it. You know, g- Going on this path, I'm 51. I've done a lot of stuff in my life already. I think I've been, really good at it. I've created a sense of like, become renowned in my own field. And not that that's so important to me, but I've gained respect in the areas of the field that I've been in my life. I've written a book. And when I started like going down this journey of AYAMA, I think they're definitely because I haven't done anything like this in a while. Like I haven't started a new project. There was a certain amount of fear. And I was sitting with that fear, especially at the beginning of 2022, the end of 2021. I was sitting in that and I realized like for me, it's not so much about like I don't really care about how many books I sell at the end of the day or how many courses I lead. For me, it's just like it's the opportunity to get to do it, and that's where I thrive in. Like that success to me is like failure is not doing something.
Mm.
Failure to me is like when purpose is knocking at the door of your heart and you don't open the door or you don't answer the call. Like to me, that is failure. Success is like, just doing it. And it doesn't matter what the results are. Success is just jumping in and doing it. One of my teachers once said, you know, just jump into the deep end of the pool. If you don't know how to swim, the ladder is right there. Or we'll throw you a life raft. But at least you did it, right?
Yeah, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolute pleasure, Yogi Aaron. When you first you accepted this, I was so excited. I wanted to learn more about this, and I want to dig deeper into this. I think we're going to find more studies on this. I think you're doing a great thing there. How can people get in touch with you?
The best way is to go to my website, yogiaaron.com. There's actually a lot of freebies on my website that they can access. And it's also a portal into my YouTube channel. They can go to YouTube, search Yogi Aaron. I'm the only one, I
Yep,
think, right now on YouTube, Yogi Aaron. And also, they can go to my podcast, which you graciously mentioned earlier,
it's great.
Stop Stretching. It's only 8 episodes, it's
Right.
just a short series that kind of takes people on the journey of what yoga is really supposed to be about and what we want to focus on when we're in our practice.
Yeah, and Yogi is obviously Yogi, and Aaron is
Yes.
AARON.com. The YouTube channel is great. You do stretching, you have interviews, you have kind of testimonials. It's a great platform as well. And of course, the podcast, your book, Stop Stretching, is on Amazon. Your first book is there as well, I believe. And
Autobiography of a Naked Yogi.
yeah, autobiography negative. Yeah, yeah. How you went with chronic pain is absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I hope one day to get down there to Costa Rica, we could have a cup of tea,
Absolutely. Or a glass of wine too.
a
That could
glass of
also be
wine. You don't have
good.
to twist my arm. Thank you so much, Aaron. You be well.
Thank you so much, Joey.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciplined Conversations.